to the Metropolitan Fire Chief Association's Leadership Development Podcast Series. This podcast is for Metro Chiefs by Metro Chiefs, engaging in conversations about issues that are relevant to members of our association. This series, however, can be useful for current or aspiring chief officers in any size department in the U.S. or internationally. Today's topic is yet another important one to Metropolitan Fire Chiefs around the globe, but more importantly, their staff, I think, and the communities that they serve. It's a topic that's the foundation of our relationship with our members and the neighbors for whom we care, and that topic is ethical leadership. With us for the conversation on this topic are two, my judgment call, amazing fire chiefs and humans. Fire Chief Richard Kelly from the Oklahoma City Fire Department and Fire Chief Tom LaBelle from the Prince William County Fire and Rescue System. Chief Kelly joined Oklahoma City Fire Department in 1991. I was just graduating high school. I'm just going to put that out there, sir. And was appointed as the fire chief in September of 2017. He promoted through the ranks in suppression and also held positions in special operations, technical rescue, as a BC Deputy Chief of Support Services, and then Deputy Chief of Ops. He was also an adjunct instructor for Eastern Oklahoma County, VOTEC Fire Training Academy, mentoring and training students for over a decade. He's a member of the IAFC, the NFPA, the Oklahoma Fire Chiefs Association, and this amazing group, the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs. Chief Kelly, you're also the current president of the Oklahoma State Fire Chiefs Association, correct?
It just rolled. I moved into the past.
Now you're the past president, yes. So
my hat's
outstanding. You a little bit of a relief valve there.
Yes, sir.
And you're also serving on the board of the YMCA and Museum Board of Trustees, and then some advisory boards for degree programs at Oklahoma State University. So you got your hands full. Chief Kelly also has an Associate's in Municipal Fire Protection and a Bachelor of Technology and Emergency Responder Administration from Oklahoma State. And you've attended the National Fire Academy. Chief LaBelle is the chief of Prince William County Fire and Rescue System in Virginia with over 30 years of service in fire and emergency services. In his role as chief, he oversees the Prince William Fire and Rescue Service, which is comprised of over 750 career and 200 volunteer personnel. Tom started his career in New York State and served as the executive director of the New York State Association of Fire Chiefs. In 2013, he and his amazing family, way more amazing than you, Tommy, moved to Virginia, and he started with Prince William County in May of 2023, so coming up on about 18 months there. Tom holds a master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School and is a graduate of the National Fire Academy's Executive Fire Officer Program. All jokes aside, gents, I really can't think of two better people who I know to discuss this important topic with us today. So both of you, it's great to have you with us. I did try and hit on most of the highlights of your career, but please feel free to touch on any areas that are super important to you that I might have skipped over.
I think you covered it all.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite too.
Well, awesome. Thank you. Well, we'll dig right into what I believe is a pretty important topic. And Richard, I'll start with you, if that's okay on this one, and just ask this question. What does ethical leadership mean to you in the context of the fire service?
Well, even though it may be a simple answer I give, it's pretty deep in what we deal with. But really, it's just doing the right thing when no one's around. And that sounds pretty simple, but there is a lot of complexity when you start looking at that. It's how we carry ourselves, how we lead. And basically, it's just how we serve every day, of making sure that we do the right thing, that we're accountable for that, and that we do it with integrity. I know there's a lot of buzzwords in what we're saying there, and hopefully, as we get in this conversation, we'll get a lot deeper in that. But really, in the simple terms, it's making sure that we're serving the public to the highest level, and that we are accountable for everything we do, whether someone's watching us or we're behind the scenes taking care of business.
Thank you, Tom. I'll kick this to you, and feel free to expand on what Richard said. But But why is this topic, why is ethical leadership particularly important in the fire service, maybe when compared to other professions?
Yeah, so I would expand a little bit on what Richard said, in as much as there's this assumption sometimes that ethical leadership is about what we're doing in the chief's office, but the reality is it's pretty easy in the chief's office, right? I'm lucky. I'm surrounded by rock stars. It's the new kid out at the station who doesn't have the safety net that we do. And how do we make sure that they're performing ethically? So to your point, when I talk to our recruits, I usually ask them what integrity means, and they give me all sorts of sort of canned answers, which is fine, but I bring in a helmet with me. And I ask someone to look inside the helmet, and what does it say inside the helmet? It's got an NFPA. It says firefighting is inherently dangerous and you shouldn't do it, but it also has a sticker that speaks to specific NFPA standards. And when you look at a helmet, you expect it to behave a certain way. You expect it to have integrity, not ethics. Ethics is a human component, right? But that consistency in how we're going to behave. And so I think in particular for the fire service, but public safety in general, there's this expectation, a brand, if you will, that we all need to maintain. And that although it can be difficult at times, it makes our lives much easier. It was hotter than heck here yesterday. Our HVAC system died at the house, and the guy came to fix my AC system. Well, I expected him to look a certain way. I expected him to act a certain way. I expected him to be ethical. But to your question, not as ethical as someone who I will let wander all around my house, who I let engage with my children, with my mom and dad who are getting older. My expectation is really high. And that's good. It helps us do our work across the board, whether it's our work, those of us lucky enough to sit in these chairs, or the folks, more importantly, outside riding on apparatus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had these conversations in the past where your uniform, just because you're wearing this uniform or this patch, whether it's Prince William or Oklahoma City, people will give you their children. They don't ask for credentials. They don't ask for any of that stuff. And it's a pretty remarkable relationship. And I think it's a fragile relationship to have with a community. It's like the years of the gift of trust, or the years of trust that can be broken in 1 minute. So,
and if I can, please, they'll also give us their tax dollars, right? Like I'm getting ready to go into our budget season. And I can tell you there are a lot of other department heads that are going to give me dirty looks over the next 6 months, right? Because my department is going to be well funded. And part of it is because they know we're consistent. They know we're intrinsically doing what we're supposed to do, that we're working ethically. And not that the others aren't, but to your point, the work our folks do out in the field, that ethical effort every single day, it pays dividends across the board.
Yeah, in that you talked about, giving us our kids. I mean, you think about it, we have the keys to the city, literally, that in our vehicles, that we have keys that have access to every business, millions of, up to billions of dollars, and they just turn it over to us, and they don't bat an eye. So it is, Tom brought that up. We're about to start our recruit class, and from day one, we're starting one next Friday. And I start that talk of indoctrinating them into the fire service, of the expectations of how they have changed today when they walk out the door, and how the city looks at them, and how their neighbors, just the neighbors that they've had on each side of them, looked at them. And now they know they're an Oklahoma City firefighter. That ethical expectation and what they want from that person is totally changed.
Well, you guys both touched on it, kind of the starting young with your recruits that are coming through the academy. But how can fire department leadership, how can fire chiefs, our peers and the Metro Chiefs and throughout the country, foster ethical leadership amongst all the ranks. And Richard, I'll start with you.
From a simple, I mean, we say this all the time, what type of leader we look in, one that leads by example. Part of that is we have to be the example. They have to see that. As Tom said, it's pretty simple. Sometimes I have people around me that are going to hold me accountable, but it really is in everything we do. And that's, we talk about the fire chief position. It's a 24/7, 365. If I'm out with, having dinner, and how I behave and how I carry myself, it is a reflection on how I am as a leader. So it starts there. Number one, how you carry yourself. It's that self reflection of what you're doing every day. And then also when you look organizationally, you have to look at, do you have policies and procedures and things in place that establish that? I mean, we could talk about it, but we really have to carry that one step further. Do we have the policies and procedures? Are we training on that? Are we talking about decision making based on our ethics and our beliefs? Because we take it for granted a lot of times that people are going to make the right decision. Well, they may make the right tactical decision, but we all know our ethics and what we're bound to organizationally and to our communities are not always about the tactics. It's how we respond and how we do things. And when we're dealing with those situations that may be gray, that may not be in the black and white, that everyone understands completely and objectively what is right. So we have to start there, carry ourselves right, policies and procedures. And I know those are simple things, but sometimes there are things that we take for granted, that we don't recognize, that we got to have those things in place and have those decisions and discussions. On that, talk through scenarios, because as we've been challenged, we know with time for us, as we get time, we get wisdom, and wisdom is from those experiences where we made bad decisions. We say, I can't always tell you what to do, but I can sure tell you what not to do. And don't take it for granted that your personnel all see things a certain way. You need to have those discussions and really get into crucial conversations. How do you have conversations about those tough areas? And sometimes it may be areas you don't totally have the answer to, that you want to talk through that of how would we make a decision here, or how would we look at that? So I think there's a lot into that, but you really have to start self first and then look organizationally how you're making sure you're carrying that throughout the organization.
You talked, Richard, about wisdom, right? Or the gray hairs that we get that are probably from all the bad decisions that we made, but and you're looking at that probably throughout the promotional process, that among other things. And so, Tom, I'll kick this question to you, but let's talk about qualities and things that you look for in people as you're promoting or hiring that you believe are essential for ethical leaders and followers, to be honest with you, in the fire service, in this profession.
Sure. I do want to reiterate what Chief Kelly just said, is that we expect and we know our people learn through tabletop, right? Through practicing radio transmissions. When our new officers come online, our new lieutenants, I say to them, hey, how many of you guys have been practicing radio transmissions? Like driving down the road, in your mind, you put that house on fire and you figure out what you're going to say. I still do it. I'll be driving down the road and I still do it. And then I'll ask them, okay, have you practiced what you're going to say when firefighter Smith pushes firefighter Jones? Because the op tempo on that is 10 times higher. And so we got to, Richard, to your point, we've got to talk about it at the kitchen table. I worked with one fire department, brilliant battalion chief, and he used to send out a document where he would basically take a firefighter behaving badly, right? And then he would attach our policies to that and then send it out to officers and say, hey, talk about this, right? He jokingly called it the help us to help you to help us to help you, right? And so, but you have to have scenario-based training, not just in emergency operations, but also in people operations. Back to your question, I think the first thing to recognize is there's no such thing, if I may, as fire service ethical behavior. There's just ethical behavior, right? I'm sure there are some sociopaths out there who can shut it off on their way out the chief's office door and on their way back in. But most of us can't, right? Like you have to have a touchstone. And so when I'm looking for whether it's promotional, hiring, whatever, it's that question of, is this person striking me, is not necessarily making decisions that I would make, necessarily decisions I would agree with, but I can tell they're based in a rock solid foundation of how we treat other people, right? How we walk with the weak, and how we support our teams moving forward. And if those things are pretty consistent, they're to Richard's earlier comment, they're going to behave well when no one's watching.
It's great. The technical competencies are a small component of the promotability, right, matrix.
Well,
when you think about
and
it,
if I can, we're spending
Yeah.
a ton of money on an instructional cadre to teach you those technical competencies. The other really interesting thing is I tell our folks all the time, I get to listen to them on the radio. It's pretty awesome, right? Most people most bosses don't get to listen to their workforce perform work. The guy who came and fixed my AC, his boss wasn't listening to him over the course of the day. And thank God it didn't make the front page of the paper, right? that would have been awful. But we get to see that work. What we don't get to see all the time until it completely spins out of control are these ethical things.
Well, I'll go a little off script because I have some other questions I want to ask, but I do want to touch on that point because you've talked about wisdom, you've talked about how we treat other people. Are these, the technical competencies are learned? Are these intrinsic? Are these ingrained in a person? Are these things that are learned, or do you have questions and processes that you follow to try and really pull those attributes out of people to know whether or not this person's going to behave in an ethical manner, if they're going to be human-centered in their leadership approaches, things like that? Richard, I'll ask this question of you. Do you think that's inherent in someone or ingrained in someone, or do you think those are something that can be developed?
Well, it's almost a nature versus nurture when you really look at things. I think there's a little bit of both. I mean, I think, a lot of people that are obviously drawn into our profession have that servant attitude and servant heart. That's not always the case. I think some people learn it. I think you have those that come in with that innate ability, and you have others that build that. And I don't think you look and say one has to be more overvalued than the other. I mean, obviously, you want that person that whatever it becomes part of who they are. You build that in their DNA. So I think some people learn that. And so that's why you look at that as you're training, as you're building those things, as you're evaluating. I look for me, as Tom said, when you're listening to radio or the technical competencies, I think when you see that every day, we have an opportunity to evaluate our workforce on a continuous basis. I mean, we see those people that really understand how to take care of people. And when we say take care of people, sometimes as a chief, we get that weird feeling because some people have that idea of taking care of people is protecting them no matter what. And we have the idea that truly what is there is taking care of them, of holding them accountable, teaching them how to do the right things, educating them, pouring into them to let them make the right decisions and understand that. So I think it's a balance. Obviously, as we're hiring, we try to get the right people that exude those qualities and are trainable, and then we build upon that, because we have some people that come in, they're really good at that from the beginning, and others we have to build upon that and give them tools to do that. I mean, so I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, if we hire the right people, we continually pour into them, we educate and focus in those areas, I think we see the good product at the end of that. And your organization, this goes back into culture of your organization. You have a toxic culture of your organization, you're not empowering your people and building into them. That's where you see those negative consequences, where you have challenges of ethical behavior, and you have that mob mentality where things happen, and you're figuring, how do we not have people stepping up saying, wait a second, what's going on here? And so I think it all kind of rolls in together. I hope I answered your question, but I think there is a balance in that of how you come about and getting the right people.
Yeah, 100%. Tommy, do you want to touch on that? Because
Yeah, just
that's right
quickly,
around.
and Richard mentioned it before, and not to belabor it, but you can have someone who inherently has a desire for anything, and if you don't give them the tools to be successful, the desire is not enough. And so we can have people that show up that have a good core, wherever that core came from, or don't. And it won't matter if we don't teach them how to exercise it, show them how to exercise it, and empower them, to Richard's point, empower them to exercise it, and then hold their hand when they fail, because they're going to fail. It's going to happen. And if we're lucky, if the folks around them, above them, below them in the organizational structure really care about them, they'll catch them when the mistakes are small, right? And reorganize and redirect and help that person get better and better, and won't, quote unquote, protect them by not having, and Richard, you said it a few minutes ago, crucial conversations, difficult conversations, the kind of conversations you can only have with people you care about.
Yeah, that's great. That's great information, because it is that balance. It sounds like Richard, I love how you put it, the nature versus nurture, or not necessarily versus, but complementing, right? Nurture, complementing nature. You both mentioned policies, and so want to talk a little bit about the role of policies. So, and I'm going to merge these two questions because I think it's deeper than one at a time. So first, how do policies and SOPs influence ethical decision making? As importantly, how should fire service leaders balance following policy with using personal or professional judgment in complex situations or in the context of the emergency?
Tom, you want to go first?
Sure. So, I mean, I think from my standpoint, there's an old saying, you lead with a compass, you manage with a watch, right? And so the ethical things, I'm not sure how much that can be put into policy as opposed to process, right? Now, for the folks that aren't necessarily understanding the ethical requirements, the process can keep them between the fence lines. And so that's just good protection for the individual, for the organization, for the community as a whole. But you can't talk enough about the why, right? And there's plenty of books out there on getting to the why of your organization. And the more we talk about that, the more the policies do one of two things. They're either going to make sense or they're not going to make sense. And both are okay, as long as, if it's the latter of the two, you reassess it and you throw it out. Chief Brunacini, right, used to say, famously, just be nice, but they still had a policy manual, right? And the issue at the end of the day, I think, is you need to have the ethics to be able to sort of live where the policy is unclear, right? Well, because I don't need automatons. I actually do need people who can have discrete thoughts, who can make decisions. I can't write, and I'm not going to write a policy for every single thing, and no one wants us to. And so it really is this piece where when it really comes down to almost binary issues, right? If this, then that. Write a policy for it. Beyond that, let's talk about it.
I think if you look in, let's just be honest, the policies are to give guidance. I mean, and it can't tell step one, step two. Those that are written well don't. They allow the autonomy for that decision making. It just gives boundaries. I always say, we identify the football field, the end zones, the sidelines, and we allow them to play within that field. Once we've identified the boundaries, that allows us. And it also sets a tone in your organization that there are some standards, there are some expectations. And I think that's what you're really trying to value, that is show value in that area of, hey, we do have some standards, we do have some guidelines. The type of people we hire are those outside the box thinkers that are trying to identify and do things. And we also know the time at the station and the time that they have with the think tanks that they have, allow them to try to identify the variables. And usually they're real good at the variables, not always the good at the staying in the boundaries. But the reality is, and it also sets a tone with our customers. These are things that we value. It shows the customers the importance, the value we place upon taking care of our customers, making sure our people have a great workplace that they can show up, where they're valued, they're safe, that they can do their job without reprisal. That, those are the type of things that we're trying to do with it. So policies are important, but just like Tom said, they got to be a balance in their environment and what we do.
I do have to say, right, we're heading into the fall, we're heading into football season. You can't call the Omaha if you don't have the initial play, right? And so there has to be a policy that lets people know what the standard, no decision making. There's a great graphic. It's called a Cniven framework. I won't get into it, but basically says, listen, you kind of go from standard process to chaos. And the reality is, best practice, day in, day out, it's 90% of what we run, right? We've seen it before. We're just going to do it the same way. We've documented it, whether it's in a policy, an informational brief, a training bulletin, whatever, and we've just created a standard response. We hire brilliant problem solvers. So policies exist to allow them to just kind of do the day-to-day and save their brilliance for the real problem, which, by the way, is part of the reason ethics is so important, right? Because they're really great problem solvers. And every once in a while, they're going to run into a problem that has an opportunity for an unethical decision. And we just need to make sure that they've practiced again for that variable response.
So, we talked about listening to our people work, and you listen to them work in the technical environment, on the fire ground, in a complex rescue situation. Tommy, you're 900 members of your department. Richard, you're north of 1,500, right?
We're about 1,200.
1,200. So you can't possibly listen to or observe ethical or unethical behavior across multiple stations and thousands of employees. So how do you and how can other leaders in the organization create a culture where ethical concerns, right, can be raised without fear of retaliation, where, we've got all these ships out at sea, and a lot of times you're trusting the captain to run that ship and you don't really notice there's a problem till there's smoke showing or the lawsuit's filed or whatever. So how do we get ahead of that? How do you create that culture where line members, the newest of the new people in the organization, or the most senior people, are willing to come forward and share their concerns when it comes to things that are unethical in nature?
I think,
if I can, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
So there's a great book, Seize the Fire, which is about Lord Horatio Nelson in 1798, I think, in his last battle, the Battle of Trafalgar. Sorry to go too far afield, but to your point, Alec, he talks about the fact that in the middle of battle, right, you can run a flag up from the commandant's ship. No one sees it. There's smoke, they're moving. And so he brings all the captains on board, and they have dinner. And he says, at the end of the day, no captain shall do wrong who pulls up alongside the enemy and lays fire, right? And so Richard touched on it before. Like, if that constant conversation of what our expectation is really what fills in that void. Beyond that, I think creating a culture that's about learning, right? And what really makes me nervous about a culture where individuals are afraid to raise issues of ethical or operational, right? Whatever. It means they don't believe mistakes lead to learning. They believe that mistakes lead to punishment. And when mistakes lead to punishment, no one's going to speak. It doesn't matter what the issue is, right? But now some people will raise issues of ethics with blood in their nostrils, right? Like they are waiting, oh, so-and-so is going to get it. He didn't or she didn't do what they were supposed to do. Well, if it's a learning culture for everyone, unless it's really illegal, it's a learning culture, right? And then once people understand, oh, I can make a mistake, we can talk about it, we can get through it. There may be some discipline, but it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean I can never be promoted. Alec, you and I have talked about this before. Show me someone who can never be promoted, fire them immediately. If they can't be, like, because everybody's got to be able to make decisions. And if you're telling me they're that incompetent, what are they doing here? And so if we're not willing to talk about these, we're probably not willing to talk about the fireground. And if we're not willing to talk about what happens on the fireground and have an open conversation that leads to us being better, we're going to kill firefighters. And so I really think it's part of a much broader cultural change. And I think the internet has been terrible for this, by the way. It has made it so easy for people to beat up on other people rather than create a culture of, hey, you made a mistake. You know, we always accept new mistakes. Let's try not to make the same mistake over and over again. But you're going to grow. You're going to get smarter. You're going to help other people. We're going to be a better organization for the mistake you made. It was a mistake. It was a mistake. If you did it 3 times, that's a trend. Right? But otherwise, it's a mistake.
Richard, what are your thoughts on that?
No, great. I love your stories, Tom. You got some great history there, so that's cool. All I have is Oklahoma history. That's all they make us do here, and you guys don't want to hear about that. But
I want to make it clear I wasn't there in 1798.
I didn't want to say nothing there, but I have a simple saying I always tell people. You have a lot of people that will say, "Don't sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff." And I'm a person that believes you do sweat the small stuff. I think historically what we see in the fire service, and we're just managing people. Obviously firefighters have a certain personality, but they're people. And when you don't sweat the small stuff, those small stuff become big things. So, you wonder how we got to a point at a fire station where it went from, harassment or horseplay to some of the level of the things that are taking place. And I believe that's because we didn't sweat the small stuff. Empowering our people to step up, say something, to deal with that. And then on the flip side, as leaders, when they do that, is like Tom said, there's times you give grace, that you educate, and there's times that you have to deal with those and deal with those in a proper manner where people feel empowered, that you can have the empower to stop something, but you can also have the power, if it is to a level it needs to be dealt with, it will be dealt with in those situations. And when you build that within your organization and you build value within your organization, and you really push that down to a level that everyone has a voice, that psychological safety within the fire service, which is a weird dichotomy for years, because I always tell our firefighters, and I tell our recruits when they walk in the door, when I was hired, they told me 2 things: the fire truck's red and your ass belongs on the back. We hired you from the neck down, and that is a bad statement, because we hired the holistic person that has value, and you can have a voice. And I really talk to that from the beginning, that you have voice, you have value, you have influence. But all that goes into this on that ethical behavior, because if people are afraid to speak up, if people are not empowered to do that, they won't. And then we continue this cycle in our organizations where people won't speak up. They won't say things. So that is important from the beginning we do that, but it's also important we have those discussions of leadership, of sweating the small stuff, of addressing those issues when someone is starting to step out of line a little bit, of just having a discussion, because it's simple there. It's hard when you're dealing with someone now that you're pushing it all the way up to an EO officer or someone else. You could have dealt with it small. And I always put that back on us, that we all have to take the advantage of that and deal with them when they're small.
I will say too, and not that it happens often, right? But it's happened to all of us on this conversation and to the people that will listen to it. You're going to walk into a station and there's going to be a violation. And the officer who's supposed to be taking care of it is going to be sitting right there at the kitchen table with you. And you, as the chief of department, are going to have to make a decision, right? Of either bringing it up or not. And it's not fun, right? It's not fun. And you're like, why isn't the captain making sure that this person is doing what they're supposed to do? Bring it up. Bring it up. Just bring it up. And you'll never have to bring it up with that crew again. Uh, I don't expect to get Christmas cards, right? But I do expect them to go home safe. And if I have to choose between the two, going home safe is my choice. And it's the little stuff that helps them get home safe. It's the little stuff, it's the policies that allow them to do the really, quite frankly, enjoyable part of the job. Because otherwise, to your point, Richard, we're coming out there saying, how in the heck did this turn into this? And so it's the expectation. It's interesting to me because a lot of this is also about equity and inclusion, right? Do people feel like they can speak up? Do people feel like they can give a voice, help explain what's going on, or do they feel excluded? Do they feel like HR is going to back them up? Do they feel like everyone will be treated equitably? And the answer to your earlier question, Alec, is if they don't feel like they work in a place that's safe to talk, that's equitable, that it values their voice, then no, they're not going to talk. And there's a million ways that we can show that we're an inclusive workplace, that we're an equitable workplace. And this is just one of them.
Well, you both touched on the concept of leading by example, right? Whether it's addressing the small things or Tommy, in your example, you walk in there, you have that decision making, can you demonstrate it? And so really there's a couple questions. So try and follow me here because it's almost in three parts. So what does it mean in an organization or as a fire chief or as CEO of any company, Tommy, to your point, it doesn't stop at the end of the fire service. But what does it mean to lead by example when it comes to ethical behavior? How can we as leaders, and specifically fire service leaders, set the tone for that behavior at all levels in the organization? And then how do we check the result? How can we ensure that leaders at all levels decisions within the department align with both the ethical standards and our departmental values? So 3 parts. And Richard, you started the last 2. So Tommy, I'm kicking it to you to kick this one off.
Alec, you and I got to work together, so I've already forgotten the first 2 questions you asked. So one,
if you want the Cliff's notes, I can give them back.
I appreciate it.
What does it mean to lead by example? How do you set the tone, and how do you check the results?
So it's discipline. Discipline has gotten a bad rep, right? Not big D discipline, we're going to HR, but little D discipline, what Richard was talking about a little while ago. And it's really based on a feedback loop, right? We have a stimulus, whatever it is, right? A call, the way someone's acting at the kitchen table, citizen coming to the door. So there's stimulus, and then there's a standard set of responses, SOPs, SOGs. There's the non-standard, which runs into things like ethics, officers having to be engaged, senior personnel who have experience, calling the second alarm because you just don't know what you're looking at. But is there a feedback loop? Is there an opportunity to go back and say, hey, what you did or didn't work? Why? You're not in trouble, but we got to figure out a better way to do it. And so but how do we find the time? We're asking our personnel to be all hazard organizations, right? And between the paperwork requirements, Con Ed, training, I'm sure it's true for you all. Our call volume is through the roof, right? The people that are dialing 911, because that's all they have to dial. And so where do we find this time for this sort of feedback loop? And if we're doing it right, it's happening at the kitchen table. It's happening on the front bumper of because Richard, they don't make them big enough anymore for you to stand on the back. There's enough room on the front bumper to sit around and talk. That feedback loop, how do we make sure folks have time to really evaluate, and then holding people accountable to what we learned? And that's discipline as well. But discipline requires that entire cycle. And also people need to know, hey, there's process, right? Hey, we're all going to be treated equally. I may end up in the hole, like I may have done something wrong, but I know why I'm in the hole, and I know I'm going to get out of the hole, and I know how to get out of the hole. And then it's the Franklin red hot stove, right? If I touch it, or I get burned, but hey, Alec, you're the chief. You're not going to get burned. No, everybody gets burned, right? We all see it's red hot. Alec used to hear me say it all the time. There should be no landmines in the fire department, nothing hidden under the ground. Everything should be above ground. You're going to know what it is well before you engage with it. The burn goes away. I think that's a big thing that scares people, is knowing that unless it's truly egregious, the burn goes away. Like, people have to know that they can come back from a problem. And if they can't, we gotta talk to them about that. And then the final thing I would say to it is, I had a wise Irish grandmother, and she taught me a lot of things. And one of the things she taught me was knowing the right thing to do isn't that difficult. It's the thing you don't want to do. The thing you don't want to do is the right thing. And so get up every morning, get to your office, right? Or in my case, get on the treadmill, and do the thing you don't want to do. And people can see when you're taking the hard road. And people, particularly, I think, firefighters, will give you a lot of grace if they know you're taking the hard road.
Thank you. Richard, again, just to repeat the question, what does it mean to lead by example, and how can we set the tone for ethical behavior at all levels? And then how can you ensure that, kind of check the results of that?
I'm going to start a little backwards, I'm going to start with checking the results. I always, when I was a battalion chief, I'd always tell my crews that I see your training hours every day. I see the things that you write down, but truly, I know if you train every day when I respond with you on what you do. I could watch a crew and say, you guys may have all the paperwork that says you're training, but you're not seeing the results of that. And I think of every day, what we see, our organization. Tom said it, the touch points we have every day. We're out in our communities, 200 and 300 times a day. And if we're seeing positive results, I start there. That's kind of the feedback loop that starts for me. If you're seeing issues, if you're hearing things, that's where there's smoke, there's fire. You got to be addressing that. So I always look from that perspective. When I come back to say, how as a leader do I ensure, number one, that I carry myself with that? I look at some things, about 5 different things that I try to carry myself through in that, and I really think organizationally as well. And you said that we talked a lot about values. Some people may not live and die by vision and mission and values. I do. I think it's something you put in front of your people every day, and you can't just say those words. You have to build that into what you're doing organizationally. And I say values. You got to start with your values, and you hire to your values. You promote to your values. Everything you do is based on that. And if they're just words on a wall, they're just words on a wall. And I think you got to start there. What are your values? Start with your values. And that goes to me internally. I have some personal values that I try to carry myself. And usually you're looking for those good leaders that the values of the organization align with the values of the leader. They may not coincide. They may not be perfect, but they're very close. Maybe a few words that you use differently or whatever. And then you got to redefine the success in that. You got to make sure that you're acting in alignment with the values. Again, if they're there and you don't use them, it's not good. It's not something that's going to make sense. And then part of that for me is I listen with empathy in what I'm doing every day. I listen in that perspective. And what I mean is my values, I hold to them firmly, but my ideas are loosely in what I'm doing and how we do things. You got to have it from a different perspective and looking at from different angles. And then the next thing that I've seen in our organization when we went through difficult times was prioritizing our culture, organizational culture within the organization. What is that? Because culture is the long term. Climate to me is that, is the thermostat, is hot or cold, and you're right there where you're at that point. But the long term of that, of what we're looking at, is not the climate, it's the culture organizationally. And I prioritize that to make sure that we're building foundational steps within the organization that creates a positive culture all the way through. And then the last part is engaging with encouraging courageous conversations. I go back to that. I use that term a lot, but we use it. We've actually done some training in our organization of that, because many times, especially that buddy to boss or living together, or people that, those are your buddies. Those are maybe your day off people that you hunt and fish and everything, of being able to have that courageous conversation to say, hey, and I have to do that as a leader. Tom said that, sometimes it feels weird. Even though I'm the fire chief, I'm not afraid to make decisions. I make station visits every week. When you make a station visit, the last thing you want to do is tell someone that, hey, buddy, how about you tuck your shirt in, or just something basic, that's something you probably go by, but there are certain things that are non-negotiables that you gotta engage in those conversations. And you have to do that from the top, in a way that is caring and not demeaning, but that you are addressing those areas. And I think, because we got to do those things for ethics, if people aren't willing to step up and say things, they're not going to deal with it ethically, because they're afraid. Even as a leader, I see leaders a lot of times that are afraid because they don't want to make their buddies mad, or they want to take care of them, or they want to do the things that make them. Really, that's a me centered, because I want to feel good. I don't want to feel bad, so therefore I don't do my job. So those are things that I try to look at to help me in that, and I think that carries out throughout your organization of how to do that organizationally.
So a component of any good SWOT analysis is threats, right? And every good fire department is also looking to the future, right? Strategic planning and those kinds of things. What do you two see as new challenges that might be on the horizon that could impact ethical decision making in the fire service, or anywhere for that matter? So what's on the horizon that we need to be concerned about, Richard?
One thing that is out there that's great, and I love it, but just AI. There's a lot of things out there. You could, you don't have to write documents anymore. You don't have to. There's just so many things you could do in that area, that is going to be there. But one thing that I say has changed the fire service is just it's in the future, but it's here today, is the handheld device. They can look at anything they want to in the firehouse, anything, access anything, do anything. So there's so many challenges in that, in the perversion of the mind and where it is. And so, that is going to be a challenge for the future, of that. But, another challenge that we're going to see is just the fact, and we tell our firefighters all the time, you're videoed, you're on video. And one thing that I think we'll see in the future, we just had a discussion about it this week with our EMS provider. Body cameras are coming. Body cameras are coming for firefighters, because what I know for us, and I've said this, I started about 4 or 5 years ago talking about it, and I do have some trepidation, but the reality of it is the public outcry will be there one day of saying our police officers are held accountable every day, our EMS staff. And I know we try to fight it with HIPAA and all these different challenges, but I think there's going to be some challenges there. And then to that, of everything, that the spoken word, everything that we do, how we care for people, everything will be on display, as far as where we are in the fire service. And I think that's the future I'm not saying that we do anything unethical, but it's going to put us in an area where everything we do will be judged and will be held account. I think those are going to be some challenges we see for the future.
Tommy, what do you think the challenges? What challenges do you foresee that could impact ethical decision making?
Yeah, so a few. One is there's a generation that has sort of defined ethical standards in this country, and they're passing, right? Like that generation. And I truly believe that the core of most ethics is pretty consistent across the globe. But there are still variations, right, of what's generally acceptable. Murder's murder, right? Like that's a pretty consistent thing. But in other spaces, it can be a little different. And so as our communities change, I live in a majority minority community, and so making sure that we're ahead. And a lot of that's about, Richard touched on it before, us staying out in the community and really being a conduit for the fire department as to what the standards are of a community. Because it's the community we serve. They don't serve us, we serve them, right? And I, at the end of the day, I think the core, Richard touched on it before, the core mission for fire departments or values is pretty consistent. Take care of the people out there, take care of the people in here, take care of the stuff we gave you to do the first two things. That's it, right? Like, just get that piece done. I don't think that changes. But I do think there are those other variations. And again, not to keep parroting Richard, but he's worth parroting. I apologize, I can't think of the name of the book, but it's about the war cabinet around FDR, right? And how important that team was, and how they would never survive in today's media, right? And I'm worried that the ability for AI to falsify what in the past was is falsifiable a word? Unfalsifiable, right? Documents, videos, right? Whatever. The incredibly high expectations will make people not want to be public servants. And that's going to be a difficult piece for us. And that ultimately, we need to recognize that the greatest hazards the fire department has ever faced are the dangerous things that the citizens want, right? They didn't have electricity. They wanted electricity. Stuff started catching on fire, right? Batteries in cars. Pick a thing that society wants and is dangerous. We get stuck in the middle of it. And I think that's what's coming next. It's all these things where society decides they want something, and their society, they get to choose. And we've got to figure out how we live in that dangerous space. And if we're not doing the training that we've all been talking about here today, if we're not preparing our people, they'll be chewed up, and they will lose their jobs, and the department will be hurt, and the standard, the integrity of our brand will be lost.
So basically, you're saying there's nothing to worry about, right?
Nothing. It's all good.
Richard, go ahead.
It was interesting, Tom, you talked earlier about how busy we are. And, when most of us came in the fire service, we all wanted to be at the busy fire stations. Yeah. And, but we're talking fire stations that, made fires. And, I don't know about you guys, but you might make 8, 9 rides a shift, 10 rides a shift. And now we're seeing stations 15, 20 plus rides a shift. And plus on top of that, to meet the expectations of our community. And I appreciate where you come from, Tom, especially talking about, look at the challenge the law enforcement communities had because they're under the microscope. I think some of that in the future, you will see the fire service under the microscope just for those challenges of accountability and transparency. And then what are the expectations of our community? Although we let them drive that, we should, they pay our taxes and pay taxes but there are some challenges, just like you said, that are great points. That's something that is exponentially growing, as I've seen in the last 7 years of my time as the fire chief, how much the call volume and all of those chains are growing so fast. It's almost insurmountable on staying in front of it and being, and being able to stay out. So those are great points.
You guys both make an hour go by really, really quickly. So rest assured that we're moving into really our last question that I want to ask both of you. And it's mostly, closing thoughts from you about this topic. And so, Tom, I'll start with you so you don't have to parrot Richard again, and all his wise statements. But
yeah.
What is the one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring leaders in the fire service about ethical decision making? And then, are there any resources, books, training programs, or anything else that you'd recommend to people that want to learn more about this topic?
Yeah. So a couple things. Some of you have heard me talk about this before, Alec. I know certainly you have. It took me a long time to figure out that what I really wanted to accomplish in my career was to protect firefighters, and that the best position to do that from is the position I'm sitting in now. And for the longest time, I thought it was being a lieutenant and then a captain and a battalion, but it's this job. Like this is where I protect the most people the most effectively. And so what I would tell people is to recognize that if you want to be effective, people need to trust you. They need to be able to have conversations with you. They need to know that you may be upset. Right? I had a great football coach who used to say, "I'm yelling to you, not at you." Right? And just need to get through it, and we're going to get through it, and you're going to be safe. And if you do that as a peer firefighter, you'll do it as a lieutenant. You'll do it as a cat, right? You'll do it at whatever rank you are. And leadership's happening at all levels if we're doing it correctly. And so, but you can't learn it on your own, right? You simply can't get enough sets and reps. And unless you're getting, and if you're not doing it in real life, and hopefully you're not bumping up against, 3 ethical problems every time you come to work, in which case call HR. You've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on. But the reality is where you find those issues is in reading. There is nothing that substitutes reading for, and now I say reading. You can listen to audiobooks. You can, I would argue, I'm at home right now, but I've got a bookshelf at work with, books that I hand out all the time. Read this. This is what you ought to be looking at next. I think there's a real undervalued inconsistency to reading lists in the fire service. It's one of the things that I want to work on personally. You have to gain your experiences through other people. And by the way, it can be in fiction, right? There's some really great fiction out there about ethical leadership. There's some great movies, fictional movies, that you can learn ethical leadership from, right? There are amazing biographies, history books, whatever. But some that sort of come to mind to me. Seizing the Fire is a great book. I already mentioned that. Ike, As We Knew Him, about Ike Eisenhower. You want to talk about somebody under stress in World War II and how he developed over the passage of time. Big book, but definitely worth the read. I know I'm going to steal this from Richard, but I'm going to do it anyways. Crucial Conversations is a book you got to figure it out. You got to figure out how to do it. You got to figure out how to have those conversations. And that, again, I would come to, if you care about people, when you provide discipline, positive and negative. You asked about discipline, by the way. Medal days, award ceremonies are discipline. It's just positive reinforcement, but it's still discipline. And so, but people can tell if you care about them when you provide discipline. And if, Richard touched on it, right? If I come out and I meet with you, and we're going to have a conversation. I really don't care what our HR director says. We're going to have a conversation, and you're going to understand why. And we're going to talk about why a lot. You'll get to a point where your people get it. And to Richard's point, once they say without prompting, is this consistent with who we're supposed to be? Obviously, they're not going to say it that way, but is this consistent with who we're supposed to be? You won. You've won. Because even if they say no, at least they were thinking about it, right? If they're thinking about it 90% of the time, they're gonna be right where you need them to be.
Richard, what are your thoughts? Piece of advice you'd give to aspiring leaders and resources that you found helpful throughout your career that you might recommend?
Well, great job, Tom. I mean, really, I'll say this. I could say, yeah, what Tom said, but I will start out with what Tom started with, because I think that was, to me, one of the main points. If you're moving to a leadership role for you, then you're not going to be a good leader. And what I appreciate what Tom said is he recognized in the role where he's at today. That's how he can make the greatest impact for those working with him. That's why Tom's a great chief. And those leaders that get into those roles and they look at this as an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others and invest in others, they're going to do the right thing. It's not always going to be perfect. So I say to that person is, if it's not about you, if it's about others, you're going to do the right thing, because that's why Tom reads. That's why Tom has educated himself. I see chiefs all the time, and no offense, they've got every letter in the alphabet soup after their name, but they did that for one reason. That's to get a chief's job. If you do those things and you learn for the opportunity to invest in others and make a difference, you're going to do a good job and you're going to make the right decisions. Because when you do that, when you're making a decision, you're not making it about you at that point. You're recognizing the decision I'm making could affect our organization, could affect those around me. I'm not going to do something that's unethical because I care too much for the people I work with and for the organization to do something like that. It doesn't mean we can't mess up, and you got to give grace in that. The best leaders give grace. They hold account when they have to at the level they need to, but they also give grace, because a lot of our great leaders have made mistakes, and through those mistakes, it's allowed them to be a great leader. But I will say, just like Tom, reading, you have to educate yourself, being a student of the game. We spend so much of our time in the fire service of training on the tactical decision on the fire ground and the emergency scenes that are about 5% of what we do every day. The 95% of what we do is leading people, teaching them how to do the right thing, training them how to be good men and women, within the organization and to treat others. And the only way you can do that is learn, read, be a student of the game in those areas. Just like Tom said, there's so many great books out there, but if you challenge yourself, one, to read, to learn what makes people tick, how do they think, look in those areas, that allows you to look at that from a perspective, to understand why people do the things they do and the decisions they make. Leadership Deception is a great book, that you really look at, is really great to read. There's a lot. I'm always, Simon Sinek, Start with Why. There's a lot of things like that. I look at that. I want to understand people that allow me to help them to make decisions. And it really, truthfully, it's a self-reflection. It allows me to understand why I might do the things that I do. But I think if you're a leader and you're not reading, you're not educating, I tell my firefighters, and this started with chiefs before me, we tell her every day is a training day, every day is a physical fitness day. And what you really think about that, every day is an opportunity to get better. So you need to be reading, learning, educating on a daily basis. And the physical fitness really comes into a not just physically ready, mentally, is everything about me ready. So we've really got in that to holistic care of taking care of yourself. In that process is important, because if I'm in a bad spot, my mind space is not there. I may not make a decision that is an ethical, sound decision because I'm not in a great space. So, the challenges we have is learn how to be educated, physically fit, holistically, that I'm making the right decision under duress. You think about the human brain and how we do things. It's about training, because we make things in an instant, emotionally, and where we go. So the whole thing we want to do is make decisions with the prefrontal cortex of our brain, and not allow ourselves to make decisions with the amygdala, where it's an emotional fight or flight or freeze. And you have to train and do that. So part of that every day is thinking about that, walking through situational awareness of, if someone does this. Tom talked about going to the fire. I love doing those things, but you also got to think about, as an officer, as a firefighter, as a leader, if someone does, and Tom brought it up, someone pushes someone, or someone says something at the dinner table, what am I going to do? And you have to walk through that, because what'll happen is they'll say that, you go to the amygdala side of your brain and you freeze, or you get up and go, I'm going to my office, time to go. That is that part of the brain taking over, instead of the prefrontal cortex taking over, going, stop, don't do that. You and I'll have a conversation here in a minute. So those are the type of things I think as a new leader, you got to prepare yourself. And through that is reading, education, and really building upon yourself.
I gotta lay on to what Richard just said a minute ago. If you think about fireground commanders, right, really good medics, they don't let the event dictate the operational tempo, right? And the same is true with all of these ethical issues. Don't let the problem pick the time, right? You pick the operational tempo. And to your point, Rich, if you haven't figured out how to say time out, then you're just going to be catching up with that fire for the rest of the night. And it's the same thing with personnel issues, everything else. And I tell all of our officers, problems are like egg salad sandwiches. They do not improve with time, right? And so just get at it.
Yeah.
Tom, Richard, I'm very, very grateful for this great information and the conversation. It's great for all of our peers to hear from experienced and principled leaders like you. And I know that our folks, our fellow members of the Metro Chiefs are going to be grateful that you're willing to share your perspectives with them. So I'll thank you for that. Do either of you have any closing comments that you'd like to offer before we wrap up?
I just want to start off with, and I tell folks, I apologize. I tell people fire departments are like marriages. You don't know if you're in a good one until you get to your second one. And I'm in a great fire department. But it means I've learned along the way. And all I would say to anyone who's listening to this is the Tom LaBelle today is better than the Tom LaBelle yesterday, is better than the Tom LaBelle a year ago, is better. And in particularly if you're new, you're going to get better. Right? You're just going to get better, but you got to have sets and reps, and you can learn through bruising, my bruising or your bruising. I prefer it was yours. Right. And so, just if you can't give yourself the grace we've been talking about here, then no one else can. And you've got to be able to do that. And I'm humbled to have an opportunity to talk with both of you.
Richard, thank you, Tom. Anything, Richard?
No, as Tom said, it was an honor to be here. I respect both of you immensely, and just like being a part of the Metro, I believe it makes us all better. You have great leaders that are willing to share and learn from each other. I think that's what makes us great in the fire service. When you look at any great organization that you see, and there's a lot of great fire departments in the U.S., the reality of why those departments are good, they're willing to get outside of where their department and their community and say, okay, what can we do better? And that's what I encourage anyone that's listening to this. Hopefully we gave you a nugget to take back, to look at, to think about, to challenge yourself, and to learn from. Just like Tom said, you can learn from each other. You can learn from obviously we learn from our own experiences, but it's always good to hear from others, a perspective. And just like Tom said, take care of yourself. That's a focus. You can't lead an organization if you're not taking care of yourself, and you got to lead ethically. In that, I think it's simply said, and we know that, but there's a lot of things that go about in that, and how you do that, how you carry yourself. You're the face of the department, whether you like it or not. And it's a opportunity. Sometimes, as we said earlier, I have a face for radio, but here you are with me. But I just want to say, keep doing the good work. It's a great opportunity to be a part of this organization, and the Metro inspires me to be a better chief, challenges me to learn from others and to do better. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you both. I'm super grateful. I know, like most Metro Chiefs, you all have a pretty packed calendar, and so we appreciate you carving out some time, and it was absolutely fantastic to spend time with you. And to those who are listening, if you took the time to listen, thank you for listening to this Metro Chiefs Leadership Development Podcast, created by Metro Chiefs for Metro Chiefs. If you enjoyed this session, please share it with others And if you have any ideas for topics that you think that we should cover in the future, please send us an email and we will do our best to get after it. Until next time, please continue to live out the Metro vision of being a place to belong, inspiring success. Take care of yourselves and each other.